Welcome to our webinar. So today we're basically going to speak the topic that we chose and compiled with the other speakers that you hear today will be from isolation to vacation, about Australia's new normal post-pandemic. We heard a few of our clients call it business as unusual. We thought that that's a nice term. So yeah, we'll be discussing today the road to recovery for the Australia short-term rental industry and what we can expect from the future of travel. For those of you who don't know me, probably most of you, my name is Yoav Turel. I'm the managing director for Guesty here in APAC. We are a team of 7. We're actually now at our office, not all of us, but we're a team of 7 here. And yeah, we opened our office here almost a year ago. So that's about myself and a bit about Guesty. You'll hear more about Guesty in a few slides. Quickly, few reminders before we get started. So just make sure that you can hear us properly. Please let us know if for some reason you can't hear or see what's on the screen. As I mentioned, we can't hear you, we can't see you. We're going to record the event and then share it via email with all of you. So you can access it and share it later on. And we highly encourage you to submit questions throughout the panel. You can see the Q&A box there, so please feel free. Our team members will pick the question as we go and we'll combine them in our discussion. Today, we're very honored to have with us a few good partners with us. We have Rob Jeffers from ASTRA, the chairman of ASTRA, the Australian Short-Term Rentals Accommodation Association. With him, Phil Spiro, also from ASTRA, a director in ASTRA, and Trevor Pugh, the co-founder and CEO of JAK App. We'll say a few words about each one of them as we go, but thank you very much. And we obviously will let you all, you know what, let's do it a bit off script. If you want to say a few words at the moment or just hello yourself, and then we'll continue. So maybe Rob, with you first.
Look, I'm pleased to be able to join you today. All of us are going through massive changes and adjusting to this new normal. It's a time where a lot of good information can come from sharing, and hopefully we can give you some insights today. Apart from chairing ASTRA, where we work closely with government to try and develop the regulation that will help provide for our industry's future. And in my own role, through my own companies, we also manage property. So very much have a keen appreciation for the kinds of things that you're all facing now. And I hope that today we'll be able to not only give you some answers, but perhaps some ideas about the way we see the future of the industry. Thanks.
Thank you. Phil, you're director in ASTRA, but you also run your own business?
Correct. Yeah, similar to Rob, I also manage some properties down here in Adelaide, South Australia, and have a bit of a role on the board at ASTRA, representing owners and managers. So thanks for having me, and looking forward to the value we can share. I think now's a good opportunity through the challenges we're facing to consolidate our industry, pull together, add some things to benefit us long-term as an industry.
Thank you. And Trevor?
Just to Guesty for making this opportunity available to be able to hopefully share some insights that that we can exchange that can assist people in this very challenging time.
Thank you. I'll just mention that just a few words about JAK App. JAK App is one of our partners in our marketplace. And JAK App, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, probably the best way to define you is that you're probably kind of the easiest and fastest way to get into tradies, qualified local tradies, great service for property management companies. And we'll touch a few aspects of that throughout the Q&A because there are things that are very relevant to our point of time. So thank you all for joining us. And in terms of how the next hour, 50 minutes will look like, I have a short intro kind of to do, a really short one about a few trends and few things that we see at our end. Then we'll jump into the bulk of the discussion, which will be the panel discussion, Q&As. So we have some very good questions. We got also from some of our clients good questions as preparation to this discussion, and hopefully we'll get from you also. We'll learn good question from you, and yeah, we'll leave enough room at the end to interact and even ask kind of more questions after the session. So with your permission, let's kick it off. So. For those of you who are not that familiar with what Guesty does, we basically, we were built with the understanding that property management and property managers are very busy. And we basically try to make their life easier. They have lots of tasks on a daily basis that probably need to be more automated. Anything from staff management, issue reports to homeowners, handling guest check-ins, checkouts, etc. We try to provide an end-to-end and one-stop solution for that. We connect with all of the main OTAs. We connect with lots of partners, third-party partners that provide solutions to property managers as part of our marketplace. And the whole idea is to try to solve the pain points and to allow the property managers to grow their business. This, I don't know, kind of quite unbelievable point in time, probably that will be an understatement. I've seen, if you've seen, there is a meme that runs now in Facebook and Instagram that said that 2020 was written by Stephen King and directed by Quentin Tarantino. I think it's probably not that kind of, probably that, pretty much close to the truth. But what we did kind of, or what we are seeing throughout this period of time is that we see new travel personas and guest expectations. We've seen, and we could see it in a different period of time, and also across kind of the world as different countries are in different stages of the corona. We see on all the displays stuck travelers. We've seen it really kind of at the beginning. We've seen in a lot of parts of the world the cityscapers. We start to see it now more in Australia as we start kind of to move from one place to another that are adding to rural areas to isolate. Very, very strong trend in the US. In the US, it's quite remarkable kind of to see how it keeps the short-term rentals industry strong throughout this time, or relatively strong throughout this time. Quarantiners, healthcare and frontline workers. We had really great story towards some companies here in Australia. I read recently an interview, they might be on the webinar as well, Made Comfy, that kind of approach, that audience. So really kind of great effort from some of the PMCs. Families, business workers who need a nice work from home environment. We have clients in Japan that telling us that they get a lot of executives that are using apartments as a place to work. There was also a recent, last week, there was an interview with the CEO of Airbnb, who said who also had a comment around that people are now working from different homes, and that's also open more options. And probably one main thing that we see is guests looking to stay for increased period of time. And speaking about increased booking longer stays, we had a webinar toward the end of April, and that's where we started to see across the business that the average of 4.5 nights moved to more close to 9. Now we see even more than that. You can see we picked here a couple of data points from the UK and Scotland, that you see that it moves from 6 nights to 23 nights, from 3 to 15 in Scotland, and I'm sure that many of you are also experiencing it. We know from our clients how some move to midterm and to offer more longer stays. Another impact of that is the lots of properties moved into long term. And we see also an inflation in that side. And you can see on the right-hand side of the slide, a recent data that's speaking specifically about New South Wales on Sydney, and the growth in vacancies in long-term rentals. So it's very interesting. One of the things that we'll speak about later on is that concept of flexible inventory or flexible rental, the move between short-term to mid-term to long-term. The longer stays also resulted in, as I mentioned, in the flexible inventory business model. Airbnb now have the monthly stays program. You can see it when you enter the platform. You can see the section for it. 20% surge in long-term bookings compared to this time last year. So we definitely see that in terms of the long stays. 80% of the hosts accept now longer term stays, and we'll also show you some data points around it, some further data points around it. And 50% are giving discounts on stays 28 days. We even see less than that, so discounting these long stays. We ran recently an industry report, and we find that close to 40% are diversifying their business models to include these longer stays. Some tips around that, and you can also see it in our site, looking into different pricing models that goes with the extended stay, the automated guest communication that correspond with that, centralize all bookings, short-term and mid-term, in one multi-calendar. That's also something that a solution that we find that is required now, and offer rental agreements to guests booking longer stays goes with that as well. So few things, and as I said, we have more to ask and to answer as we go. Speaking about Australia, so 50% of Australia prefer to stay within days drive, or a few hours drive, we should say, for their first trip after the COVID-19. Some of that it's because of where and how we can travel, but that's also looking to the sentiment and the approach of travelers. Airbnb recently launched the Go Near campaign that promotes the domestic travel based on pretty much on that insight that people wants to remain close to that, close to home or relatively close to home. And the Australian short-term rentals experienced a huge wave of booking the first week of June. We had the Queen's birthday, very soon the school holidays, and we can definitely see a really good positive growth for future bookings. One of the things that we have, and that open to anyone, customer and non-customer, is our info center. lots of articles and content that we created or curated. Lots of our partners are kind of writing on that. So you're more than welcome to get in and to look into it. As I mentioned, we ran recently an industry report. We had 400 PMCs globally that responded to that. The state of short-term rental industry amid the COVID-19. The two main themes that emerged from that is the flexible cancellation policies that we can see more and more out there, and the reduced daily rates that kind of goes together with that. Other interesting insights there, as I mentioned, we see increase of close to 80% in new reservation globally, May versus April. We see 75% year increase in Australia, kind of a bit larger in the US. Also, kind of other kind of key findings specifically for Australia, you see very, very large numbers of new booking that increased between April to June. Obviously, kind of April was, it was a very low base based on the period of time, but it's really good kind of to see that people are starting to book more and more, and I'm sure that many of you are feeling it. The average nightly rate decreased by 60% to around $65 per night from what we see, again, when we're comparing it between the months. So these are kind of things, but definitely the recovery is coming. Another kind of nice thing kind of to see is that this graph that speaks about the occupancy rate that they are expected to normalize in the next few months. This is not our data, but it's pretty much on par with the data that we see at our end. So I believe that that's my last slide before we move into the questions. So the future does look bright. Travel will return, with domestic travel picking up faster than international, as we can expect. I think that we kind of, once the restriction are eased and as we go through the corona, I don't think that we'll see many people that are saying, all right, now that it's gone, I want to have a bit of time to relax at home. I don't think that will be the case. People will want to go out. So we predict a significant uptick in the near-term bookings. If travel bubbles, New Zealand, Fiji, discussion on Singapore, all kind of that are Europe. I think from today, the European Union kind of chose the different countries that can fly to them. So we definitely kind of see it kind of a uptick in the near-term bookings. And in addition, we see an uptick in reservation for the holidays, Christmas and New Year's Eve. Having a flexible cancellation policies kind of show or result in more and more bookings. So that was our short part. I would like to say a few things about kind of ASTRA, because ASTRA, first of all, were a crucial part in bringing this webinar to life. I can say from our experience of working closely with ASTRA is that I think that they make us and the industry better with their knowledge, with their care, their genuine care on the status of the business. I can say that we learn, and our clients through them learn quite a lot. And it's really it's really great. And in some cases we see it because we can kind of compare to different parts of the world. It's quite impressive to see that the work they're doing to bring the standards and the relationship with the different government and state bodies kind of to the eye level. So first of all, thank you, ASTRA, for kind of assisting us and taking part in this webinar. And we're very happy to have two of you on the panel, Rob and Phil. So thank you for that. Let's kick it off, our Q&A session. So what we'll do now, we'll have a few questions for all of us, and then there are questions that are targeted to each one of you. Please feel free to jump and to add, even if it wasn't kind of your question. You can see that the yellow, that's for the panelists. You can see kind of that around your window there is a yellow. That means that's kind of that's your now kind of have the ability to speak, or that you're unmuted. So let's go for it. Cool. First question that we have for you is, what do you think is the biggest change that we'll see in the short-term rental industry in Australia in the post-COVID-19 world? How can property managers or management companies can prepare for that? So what's the biggest change? That's probably the first good question to start with. Who wants to start?
Well, I'm happy to start there. Thanks, Hugh. And thank you for the introduction. Well, look, the industry is going through massive change, not just in Australia, but around the world. And I guess the best place to start is that we've really missed a bullet on a global level. COVID is still raging across the world, and we're extremely fortunate to have had some very proactive decisions and strategies from the government that have really given us world best practice in terms of controlling the spread of infection. But everything that we look at going forward has to be seen through the lens of this COVID is still active and it's still deadly. And as you've seen in Victoria just in the last few days, with secondary spikes happening, they're now shutting down elements of the industry. So I guess the first thing to say is that until there is a vaccine, which could easily be 18 months or 2 years away, this is still an active threat. So we haven't had a cure-all. We're really basically put off the impact. And I guess that's why it's so important for all of us to recognise that part of our move forward is that we're on the front line of interaction between travellers and communities, and we're also there are risks in having guests there. So I'd like to start by saying that for all of us, however diverse the industry is, from people who own and manage their own property to the larger operators, the very first thing we've got to do going forward is making sure that we're abiding by the protocols, whether it's yourself, your staff, the way you hand over keys, that's being done, that the cleaners and contractors who are going into the properties know what they have to do to stay safe, and also to ensure that the guests who are coming recognise that your principal guest has a responsibility to look after all the other guests, to make sure that they're not bringing someone who is showing signs, to make sure that they're not going into the cafes and having parties and doing all of those sorts of things. Because if we do see those spikes, we will see further shutdowns. So I think that right now, whatever size, whatever scale you are, being COVID safe is a priority. And depending on the time, I'll tell you some of the work we're doing with the New South Wales government in particular on a campaign that'll roll out probably in the next couple of weeks, I'd say, to assist with that.
Thank you. Phil?
Yes, thanks, Yoav. Yeah, just echoing Rob's thoughts, I think a lot of the attendees today would already be aware that in each state of Australia, we're going through different phases of regulations with governments, and that's what ASTRA exists for, which is advocating for our industry. And this whole circumstance with the virus has come at an interesting time where we were still working through that. So I see it as an opportunity for our industry to prove that we're here for the long run, that we have the professional systems, that we should be considered as seriously as any other type of accommodation. So we all have to be responsible and actually act the right way with these systems that Rob's talking about, such as especially the cleaning. So there are protocols around that. The types of guests which we're hosting, screening people, symptoms, where they've been, how many people are in their rooms, and Rob touched on a good one, which is parties. If you're in a CBD location, especially when the bars are closed, I've seen a bit of an uptick on people using it as an excuse to book a room, especially a larger type of room, which we offer in our space, and use it as an opportunity to have a good time. But we don't want to get tarnished in the media, especially for allowing these types of things. So yeah, as an industry, we should be on top of all of these aspects to prove ourselves and strengthen our position when dealing with governments around regulation.
Thank you. And Trevor, from your perspective? Yes,
mine's more of a from an operational perspective, and I think certainly safety and building trust through the implementation of safety protocols. Because of the pandemic, the guest expectation in particular is going to be heightened in relation to cleanliness and hygiene and that contactless environment, and to ensure that the social distancing protocols are adhered to. And just a couple of things here in relation to cleanliness. Property managers can have access to some fantastic resources through World Health Organization, and your state-based or territory-based health departments have good resources in order to help you implement that sort of stuff. For all of our service providers and cleaners that we engage, we've actually produced our own step-by-step guide, and we ensure that is top of mind with them in any any job that they're carrying out at any property. One other thing, just in relation to contactless, I think Rob touched on a bit of this. Certainly, the less meet and greet and the social distancing is going to be paramount. We would like to see property managers using more sort of keyless entry, key boxes, and any other tech solutions that you can find that will actually allow you to have that the non-contact, the contactless experience. What we recommend.
Yeah. Thank you. Rob, you started at the beginning saying, it will take kind of maybe a couple of years until there will be kind of vaccination. If we're thinking about kind of prediction, and specifically on the short-term rental industry in 5 years, do you have any kind of thoughts on where it will be?
Oh, we have an amazing future. And I guess it's evolving before our eyes. Whatever business you're in, whether you're managing your own property or you're building your own business of managing other properties, it all begins with a vision. Whether that vision is to provide great service to an individual guest, or whether it's to build something that does that on a scale, together we're defining a new sector of the accommodation industry. And this is coming, this is why we're coming up against such stiff opposition from the global hotel codes that pretty much dominate the Australian accommodation sector. We now are responsible for over 20% of the accommodation that's offered in Australia, and that is only going to increase. To do that, however, it won't be just a case of taking advantage of technology to empower your business and harness more resources. It'll be using that technology to present your differences and what separates you and identifies you from others. I think beyond that, our industry has to come of age. We haven't had regulation, so we've been terribly damaged by a very small number of irresponsible owners who've been having parties and so forth, and guests that don't respect the impact that they have on their neighbours, particularly where in strata where all of those things are amplified. And I think that the professionalism that's coming, and this is what we have to find in this coming few years, if we're to come of age as an industry, as a full-blown accommodation sector, we really need to find the standards that make us, that get rid of that weakest link in the chain, that give guests confidence, that give government confidence in the professionalism of our operators, that assure people that they're going to receive the service. Excuse me, there's a motorbike going past. That assure guests that they're going to be staying in a place that's safe and clean, where they're going to be protected by insurance, and that the properties are real, so that they're registered, and we don't have operators who are misrepresenting properties and others who have been using some of the platforms for fraud. So that's just some of the things. I think you'll also see, I hope, a move away from the industry being identified as Airbnb or stays or something else. I think that we've got to be identified as what we are. We are a class of accommodation, not an Airbnb. That's not to say that Airbnb don't do a good job, but we are short-term rental accommodation providers, and we need our own generic standard there. And I think that you'll see that that'll emerge through aggregation too. And I think that's a question later, but rather than stealing the show, I'll sort of hand over to the next person.
Anything from you, Trevor or Phil, to add to the predictions?
You have, I think we've covered a few things here. Yeah. The question you can remind me was around predictions on how technology will.
Yes, yeah.
Right? Right.
Yeah, that's part of it, yes.
Sure. Trevor's touched on one aspect. I mean, there's so many different technologies we can introduce into our accommodations. Trevor's touched on the entry for guests, cleaners, maintenance teams. Even before COVID, having something digital, keyless, is a good guest experience and can help separate us from hotels, especially when in some circumstances in the cities, some hosts don't actually personally check in their guests. So there's no real aspect of a reception. And I think instead of using these manual lock boxes, which are prone to many problems, lost keys, copied keys, whatever security issues, these keyless systems are the way of the future. Integrating them as a retrofit into some properties, especially if it's a strata situation, can be challenging. So that's something that's going to come over time. It's really dependent on a property by property basis. Members of ASTRA receive support on this type of thing and advice, because we have experience on it. Aside from the entry into properties, the biggest one, which is easily able to be implemented, are noise sensors, which is something that Airbnb already promotes on their site, but probably not enough. And just talking around what Rob raised with parties, I mean, that's the biggest thing we get trashed for in our industry through the media. Current affair, today, tonight, you name it, there's always going to be a story about some huge Airbnb party that caused $50,000 worth of damage. Now, it's a very, very simple fix. There are noise sensors out there which you can permanently install into the room. They don't record sound, just simply noise. Depending on which one you go with, they have different setups, but essentially the idea is that you will receive a notification when the noise has exceeded a certain level for a certain amount of time. And if you have a tight guest contract in place with your guests, it's very easy to rock up yourself or with security to ask them to leave if they haven't heeded your warnings of reducing the noise. So all of these issues, these huge parties, could be so easily preventable if we just had noise sensors in place across the board, rather than waiting till the next morning to hear about what happened last night when you had no idea. So those two things are probably the way of the future, and the noise sensors, I think, will be first because they're more easily implemented. We'll be releasing some recommendations soon and some deals for ASTRA members or anyone interested in joining. So watch this space. We might speak with Yoav about sending out an email and a bit of a deal around what we recommend. So that's my take.
Okay, so kind of the technology element, the less contact type of solution, or remote controlling solutions. I kind of I want to add to the prediction from a different angle. Hotels. Do you see hotels more getting in locally to the short-term rental space, Rob?
Well, the hotel sector has no option but to enter our market. And I guess the easiest way to sort of put that into perspective is that Accor, for example, through all their various brands, controls something like 15% of all accommodation in Australia. Only in the last 2 years did they acquire Mantra Serviced Apartments, 22,000 rooms around Australia, and paid $1.2 billion for it. And what it says is, if they're going to be a major accommodation provider, whether it's providing different types and styles of hotel accommodation from their Grand Mercure down to an Ibis or Formula, or a different budget version of brand, they want to be able to provide that in all sectors. So already those big operators have moved into the holiday rental space. I think that there are a lot of barriers for them in terms of success. Principle around those is the sheer cost of providing service for such a diverse range of properties. There's no model, there's no formula, there's no simple standard approach to preparing a house, cleaning it. They can't do it en masse. So those present challenges, and what they'll be looking for is the kind of model that provides an aggregated solution where there's the economies of scale to get cost efficiencies and to be able to market that as part of their core range. They're going to have to rely on service delivery and performance because they can't afford to have a property that lets a guest down, and they don't have the same degree of control as they do within their standard. You will, however, you cannot have a Mantra, or sorry, an Accor, a Marriott, who already have 1.3 million hotel rooms around the world, an IHG or these other groups, without moving into our space. So I think you've got to expect that. I think you'll see that, as in the UK with Sykes and America with companies like Vacasa, who are already aggregating to build national brands, that will happen, and those will create the kind of targets that the hotels will swoop on in exactly the same way. In the last 5 years, they've acquired Oaks Serviced Apartments, Quest Serviced Apartments, Mantra, Peppers, and Medina. So it's definitely coming. At the moment, they are the most outspoken people taking on our industry with government. They're looking for protectionist controls. They're saying that we're damaging them. They're mostly foreign-owned companies, but they're very big, very powerful, and they have a direct ear to government. And that's the kind of thing we're up against at the moment. But our time is coming, and we're just growing through that.
Going through you just touched the government. What does the government, or what role should the government play in assisting the short-term rentals? What kind of...
Is that to me?
Yes. Just because that you touched the government.
There's a great difficulty because we're being challenged by the hotel codes. That's specifically represented by TAA at the moment, which is the Travel Accommodation Association. That's actually a division of the Australian Hotels Association, which is probably one of the biggest donators to all sorts of government across Australia, and they are directly talking to the ministers and the governments. For us, so the messages that they're putting in is that we're illegitimate, that we don't have standards, and they absolutely prey on every mishap we have from parties and so forth, and that's part of the reason why they gain so much traction. We need regulation to come in to help us do that. We need to demonstrate service standards so that government will take our industry seriously, not as some pretender, but as a full-blown core sector of the Australian accommodation industry that's already responsible for over 20% of the accommodation and growing. To do that, we've not only got to put in place regulation around Australia and make sure that that's consistent and not protectionist as the hotels would seek, we've also got to start to shift our act up and start to work with the tourism and trade ministers. And you'll see photos or imagery and advertising all over Australia promoting hotels and the like. You rarely, if ever, see it for holiday accommodation. When we're at that point, you'll see we'll have come of age, and that's why we have to unite as an industry to amplify our voice.
Thank you. Thank you. A question for you, Phil. In a recent survey that Airbnb did, nearly half of the Australian responses said that they'll prefer to stay within a day's drive. That's what we showed earlier, that they will, kind of be relatively close to their first trip after, or, as we started to go through the COVID-19. What are some ways that you would recommend to property management companies? How can they appeal to domestic travelers? Do you have any kind of tips and tactics that you use or that you see others are using?
Yep. The question in how to reach out and access these types of guests is more what we should be focusing on rather than how we provide it as service, because that should be top level either way. So for the managers and owners that have gone to the effort of having their own website set up to avoid OTA fees, they can advertise their website targeted to certain areas through things like Facebook, which allows you to target specific areas, specific demographics, gender, age, interests, whatever it may be. So for example, in Adelaide, where I'm based, if you had rentals down in Victor Harbour, which is a beachside town about an hour away, you could actually target your ads specifically to people that live in Adelaide rather than just relying on Airbnb or booking.com or whatever it may be, which doesn't really work that way. So that would be one suggestion I would have.
Okay, nice. That's an interesting one, kind of in terms of kind of being more local also in how would you distribute and advertise your listings. You touched, that's a question for Trevor, because you touched kind of the different services or kind of things that you offer. What, Trevor, for you, what are the top 3 to-dos that every property management company should have on their cleaning and operation checklist?
Firstly, what we would recommend is that you provide a step-by-step guide for cleaners just to enhance that whole sanitation and disinfection process. Certainly anything that would minimise contact and engage contact technology, and covered before, but pretty much keyless entry systems and so on. Anything that is of a reactive nature that could occur even within the property that then can be reported and actioned without any contact, we would see as critical. If the property has been vacant for an extended period of time, we ensure that there's a checklist to make sure that plumbing and electrical appliances are all in in good working order, smoke alarms are operational, and pool pumps and spa pumps and so on are working as they should.
Thank you. Now, but just on that point, and that's a question for you and for anybody else that want to answer. Are there any? We heard about kind of that there are a few kind of ideas on certification or third-party standards for cleaning and safety. Do you know about kind of any of these here in the Australian market? Is it kind of, as far as you know, is there a plan to roll standards or as we see in other parts in the world?
Yeah, there is there's a general cleaning certificate in Australia. It's a Cert 3 in cleaning operations. And also in addition to that, cleaners can now upskill by completing their COVID infection control training, which is a government-supplied online training, which is pretty straightforward, pretty simple to participate in. Yeah, so they are kind of the two areas that our cleaners would need to abide by.
Okay, thank you.
I might perhaps add to that, if I could, Yui.
Yes,
There are companies that are seeking to create standards in Australia for presentation or booking or ranking of properties or star equivalents or safety. From an ASTRA perspective, we're very keen to have those standards. We're not keen to see one company claim ownership of that title because you could find an individual operator that effectively is able to license properties and create a standard that they own in their own right. We're very keen to make sure that whatever standards they are aren't given as a corporate license where one company owns the space. We're keen to see standards that all people can work to. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. I have two last question. Then we'll move to question from the audience. A question to you, Phil. We spoke before about the notion of flexible rental or flexible inventory in terms of more longer kind of a stay. So do you experience it kind of yourself? And also, do you have any tips around that on how to basically, or to PMCs that are looking to introduce more mid-term kind of stays?
Yep, sure. Had a little bit of that here down in Adelaide. I think it's important just to check across each platform that the link you have, whether you're already with Guesty or currently with someone else, is actually allowing those longer term stays and that you're pricing accordingly. So it may require pricing rules because if you haven't applied them and you're just basing off a 2-3 night rate across 1 or 2 months, there's no chance you're going to take up that 1 or 2 month booking because your price would just be astronomically higher than others who have sort of adjusted their pricing accordingly. So that's the midterm booking, aiming for the 1, 2, 3 month stays. If people are thinking about putting their places on the longer term market, 6 to 12 months, that pretty much just involves blocking your calendar, potentially removing the rental from your PMS. But I mean, look, market's already picking up. We should all be trying to get around the industry, and I don't think there should be a need, I don't think, at this stage to go towards the 6 to 12 month rentals.
Okay, thank you.
There's probably something to add there. In many states, in order to be able to offer a lease, you will in many states require a real estate license. It's coming under a different regulatory system under fair trading. So when we're doing short term, we don't actually offer a tenancy which gives all sort of protections to privacy and access and so forth, and virtually gives the tenant full rights to the property. In short term, we provide a license to occupy, which is limited in much the same way a hotel or motel can. And that gives us the right to enter, the right to address issues if they are there, and to actually terminate the stay as well if that guest isn't doing the right thing. So that 3-month limit is the defining set between operating on a short-term occupancy, license to operate or license to occupy, or the residential tenancy.
Okay, thank you. We'll open up now in the last few minutes that we have. We'll open up now for questions from the audience. I'll just say kind of just quickly that before we finish kind of the session, you will see kind of a small window of a survey popping up. It's only one question. So if you can kind of answer it, that will be much appreciated. And here we go. It just kind of jumped on the screen. But let's move to the question from the audience. Okay, so we have a first question is because the listings on Airbnb, for example, have been without a booking for a few months, and with that, no reviews, no click on search, etc. All these will have an impact of this SEO of the listing. How can we deal with that? What strategies can we now apply to increase the SEO of our properties on the listing site? If anyone here wants to kind of to take it. Any jumper on that? Phil,
yeah,
would you deal with that?
It's always a bit of a mystery exactly how Airbnb, for example, manages their SEO. They give some hints. You can look them up specifically, which aspects will help your SEO, but I don't think that's the full picture, and they don't provide any weighting or the equation on how it works. So it's still a bit of a mystery. The only thing you can really control on your side is making sure that all the amenities, the correct amenities are selected. They're always updating that all the time. So just go through and make sure you've got your listing completely up to date, high quality photos, enough photos. And then the most obvious one is adjusting your pricing regularly. So every time you adjust your price, I'm pretty confident that will affect, Airbnb picks that up as this person's actively targeting their rental. So, if you haven't updated your price in a week or two, that's going to hurt you as opposed to updating it daily or every second day.
Yeah, I'd like to add something to that as well. And that is that for many operator managers, Airbnb is the only channel they're using. But really, that's just like saying you're only going to advertise on Channel 7 on TV. There's lots of other channels. And one of our big responsibilities is to find quality guests. They're not all limited to Airbnb's database, so or Airbnb viewers. So really, that's why you see Guesty and others starting to push channel managements, making sure your listing isn't just in one space, but is in every space, whether that's stays, booking.com, Airbnb, or indeed social media, Instagram. All of these things have an impact, and they're all important channels for you to use. And I think in coming years, you'll see even more of them rather than fewer.
Okay, thank you. I'll pick another question. Exactly, we spoke about kind of the flexible inventory, flexible rental. One question here is many properties insurance policies for short-term rentals are limited to accommodation less than 3 months. I think kind of was that a question or a comment? Do you have any kind of any tips or any kind of feedback on the insurance part?
I'd like to respond to that. I can assure you from my own experience, most owners or landlords don't fully understand what insurance they have or the level of cover they have as well. Many people who have their properties offered for short-term holiday rental don't even have a policy that incorporates and covers those guests. There will be standards coming in New South Wales, and they'll likely set a precedent that will flow throughout Australia, where just like a taxi, where the car's insured and the driver is insured, where your insurance will have to cover the passenger. So you will see that that's going to be a requirement, almost like a CTP insurance for operators. But I think also, and we're finding this, we've actually set up our own insurance system for operators, because we wanted to take the pressure off landlords to just go and pick an off-the-shelf program. If they want to fully understand it, they can pick and choose. And I'm sure you'll see a lot more competition in that space. And because of that competition, a lot more clarity around exactly what you're getting. And I think that's going to be good for everyone.
Thank you. Another question, you mentioned about kind of New South Wales with the restriction. Does that mean that we need to register now or still to come in terms of the what is expected from the New South Wales government?
Okay. Well, the New South Wales government has already put in place the legislation that provides for property registration. That was due to be implemented from 1st of October, along with the Code of Conduct, which has been confirmed or finally endorsed. We spent about a year and a half working with the New South Wales government and most other stakeholders in forming that Code of Conduct, which covers both the industry, operators, the guests and their responsibilities, and various other things around performance, service and so forth, and noise complaints. The registration is a key part of that, because it assures that every property is formally scrutinised and that the operator or the owner-manager give a commitment that that property is safe and compliant and fit for habitation. And I think you'll see that's been deferred by COVID. I think you'll see that planning is working on that now, the actual registration system that will include source documents, proof of insurance, and probably source documents that provide either proof of a management agency agreement or a rates notice that confirms the actual address, the zoning, and the ownership of the property. I think we'll see that come in the first half of next year.
Okay, thank you. Another question here, an interesting one. How would you deal, that I would love to know, how would you deal with guests who don't leave after the checkout? No, police are saying that it's a civil matter. Have you come across it? Any of you?
Well, yes, we have had that situation. You will find there's also going to be a greater emphasis on your terms and conditions, and ASTRA is going to be seeking to create a standardised template that you'll be able to download and customise. But your terms and conditions give you the rights to not only raise charges, so you can't fine someone, but you can raise a charge if you've got to make a service call, if you've got to do something else, or even if you have to terminate that rental. If they're not leaving the property, you can, we actually have security companies. We rarely, if ever, have to do it, but we will bring them in if that's required, and we will also issue a service charge to the guests, and they'll be charged for it.
Okay, thank you. Another kind of question that we got is, do you find the different age groups that are traveling now? Do you see kind of a different composition of your regular kind of guests? Do you hear it from your kind of, from your own experience or from others?
I can tell you in our operations, The guests at the moment are younger. They're very energetic. They're excited to be out and travelling, and they're looking to get together and enjoy themselves. There's a lot more wear and tear on the parties, and there's a lot less consideration for distancing and protection of the local communities. That's a risk for us, and that's again part of the reason why we're working with the New South Wales government now to roll out responsibilities so that unfortunately the industry opened up before we had a chance to put in overall protocols. It was just a free-for-all when the bookings were opened, and we'll go back now because of this secondary spike in Victoria in particular and release industry-wide protocols, and they will include guest responsibilities as well.
Lev, thank you. I see that we got a comment here. Can you open it up, please, on the LinkedIn, one from Julie George? Yeah, I see kind of a comment to Phil comment on the questions around the algorithm, the Airbnb algorithm, that you're spot on. Airbnb algorithm is similar to Google SEO ranking. Make sure the content is updated, add new feature, add changing prices. Will all help with the ranking of the property. That's from Julie George, for those of you who know her, the $1 million host. Thank you, Julie. Do we have any more questions coming in?
I'm not sure Mike saw the answer.
Yeah, there was one question that I see that Phil responded within the chat to Mike. So just making sure that Mike sees that. It was, should Victorians identify all guests in a group when accepting bookings, including confirming the postcode of origin? Also, should we cap at 5 guests as per directives for families? And I see that, Phil, you answered that question in the chat. Yeah? Yeah, so I'll just kind of see what I'm basically kind of feel. If you want to add to that, please feel free. I'm just kind of reading it from the post that yes, it's a good idea. We should be aware of all guests entering our properties. The capping should depend on the property type. Yeah. So thanks for replying on that. I see we have kind of quite a few kind of comments or questions. People appreciate the kind of the answers. All right, good. Yeah, look, I think that's probably kind of pretty much it. We extended a bit kind of the time, so thank you for being with us. Is there anything else that one of you kind of would like to add that we haven't touched or should have touched? Or yeah.
Probably the only thing that I'd like to suggest is that those of us, and most of us, are receiving some sort of support from government at the moment. We're all making plans around today, whether we're getting job support and the like. In September the 24th, I think, is the cut-off date for that. There has been talk of the government introducing new tests for this second 3-month period. Our feeling is that the government will stay the course for the full 6 months, and there won't be a supplementary proof required to verify your JobKeeper status. I think we can't be certain of that, but we do know the government's very, very concerned now about what might be viewed as a cliff edge at the end of September when JobKeeper starts. There was an earlier question about what will happen. The other accommodation sectors are saying they want JobKeeper and so forth to run through till March. Our industry is mostly enjoying a mini boom at the moment. I think we'll see that continue as long as people are a little bit antsy about air travel, particularly international travel. And really, this is a time for our industry to come of age and do that by delivering quality service. The JobKeeper, I think we might be able to see the government continue some support. We'd love to be able to talk tourism into developing an Australian passport where you can actually go to each part of Australia and have your passport stamped, and use that as a kind of mechanism to get people to go out and see every little bit of their state or the country. And hopefully we might get a little bit of traction for that. Anything to do with regional travel is particularly good for our industry, and that's where we shine in driving regional economies and regional tourism.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the three of you, for your time and brains. We were very honored to have you on board. Thank you very much for all of those that dialed in and listen and watch us. Hopefully you find it interesting and insightful. As I mentioned, we will follow up with a recording of the session. And if you have any question to the panelists, to us, feel free to contact us. You will have in the email that we'll send all of the contact details, and we will be and we'll make sure that we pass the question to the relevant people. So yeah, thank you very much. Stay safe, everyone. Hopefully the new financial year, it's also kind of a new future that coming in. And I yesterday booked my holiday for 2 weeks time. So, here we go, locally, short-term rentals. Thank you very much.